Moving on, with the world being on the cusp of the fourth industrial revolution, the healthcare industry is quickly adopting the resultant cutting-edge medical technologies to diagnose, treat, and cure patients. By means of the next session, panelists will highlight the impact of these developments and how healthcare providers can respond to them. I've been told this panelist is going to be one of the most intriguing yet. I would now request our session moderator to the stage, Brittany Latson, managing partner at HashtagHealth. Ooh, that's a fun one. Please come up on stage and she will take the proceedings next on the topic healthcare on the brink of the fourth industrial revolution. Round of applause. Hi there, welcome.
Yes, good afternoon. Thank you everyone for being here. I'm actually going to do something a little different. I think in the past year we've had enough of being talked at, and I'd like to open up a face-to-face and a more engaged discussion. So I'd actually like to welcome all my panelists on stage and join me in your seats. Okay, well, thank you for that introduction. As stated, the fourth industrial revolution is defined as the fusion of advances in artificial intelligence, robotics, the Internet of Things, that's where I come in for my specialty, improved communications, genetic engineering, quantum computing, 3D printing, we have some of that in our discussion today. Essentially, it's a way of describing the blurring of boundaries between the physical, digital, and biological worlds. It's been described as a way to increase human productivity through artificial intelligence and automation. So today, with my fellow panelists, Healthcare on the Brink of the Fourth Industrial Revolution, I would like to discuss with you how healthcare is being affected and transformed as an industry and is leading to advances in personalized medicine. As mentioned, my name is Brittany Latson. I am the managing partner of accounts and operations for HashtagHealth. I actually have a background in clinical research, pharmacy, medical communications, healthcare marketing. About 10 years ago, I really felt that the industry was missing out communicating with professionals and patients where they were going to seek information and talk on social media. That led myself and my partner, Kristen Hassan, to found HashtagHealth, the first and only social media agency focused in healthcare. For today's discussion, I would like to open up with each one of you introducing yourselves and giving an overview of your specialties. And to make things a little interesting, if you can provide some insights based on your experience of where do you think this industry is going to go in the next 10 years? Gennaro?
Hi, my name is Gennaro Medda. I'm the Chief Technology Officer of Between MD. As a Chief Medical Technology Officer, the name implies that I'm in between technology and medicine. And it's given me an opportunity to move from technical innovation towards practical implementation of these devices in medicine. Prior to that, I was with Vital Intelligence, and we developed a software that extracted vital signs, your heart rate, respiratory rate, blood pressure, and oxygen saturation from camera. And there were quite a few different opportunities for that during the COVID situation. I'm also on the advisory board for several different companies, ranging from AI to AR, as well as health and wellness products. In the next 10 years, I see an evolution of information. As we go from integrating all of these technologies and the technical implementation towards interoperability with all the different technologies and then automation, we're going to see an opportunity to use all of this data. You know, millennia ago, we shared data just by sharing stories. And it was, if the intention was to educate people. Now we have an enormous amount of data everywhere, and the intent is still to educate people. We just don't know how to do it yet. Hopefully the new algorithms that we're going to see in artificial intelligence and deep learning are going to be able to extract different types of information from this data. And one of the books I read recently explained it to me best. When you just have data, it's just numbers. You get information that is data such as, you know, temperature, Fahrenheit, addresses. When you have enough data that shows truths, you get knowledge. And when you have a pool of knowledge, you get wisdom. Over the next 10 years, as we start to explore this data that we're getting from the myriad devices that are out there, and there's quite a few of them, they do just about anything now, we're going to get a chance to really look at personal medicine and start to see trends within each person's health. Then each person...
Excellent point.
Oh, I
but
apologize. I'm sorry.
I actually want to kick it over to Ron because
I
I think this is a
apologize.
perfect segue into what you do.
Thank you. Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Rahm Paravemba. I'm the Chief Medical Officer for HashtagHealth. And our focus has been on geospatial data analytics as a tool to visualize and look at health conditions as they affect populations. Areas of focus in the past have been things like the opioid epidemic, looking at the risks of overdose of patients in specific populations, so interventions can be instituted early before it's too late. We've looked at things like maternal and child health, as that is a growing health indicator globally. And most recently, we've deployed our tool to look at the transmission and vulnerability of populations with regard to COVID-19. Obviously, that has affected many of us, and as an anesthesiologist and frontline provider, I've actually been firsthand seen the patient suffering, the family suffering, and the social destruction brought on by this current pandemic. So what we're hoping to do, and what we've done, is deploy our platform as an early warning system, surveillance system, for future pandemics to try to prevent similar issues. And really our focus, in listening to some of the keynote speakers and in thinking about how our platform really does fit many of the criteria where healthcare needs to go in the future. One thing is it's global in nature, and we need to have a global strategy of how to fight future pandemics, how to bring healthcare data and standardize that data, make it interoperable. And using geospatial technology allows for all of those things. How do I see the next 10 years? Obviously, I think we need to go further in that direction. We need to look at the social determinants of health, which is incorporated in our data sets. What social factors, environmental factors, demographic factors really affect a person's health, whether it's child health, maternal health, opioid issues, pandemics in the future. And then we have to work as a global community to bring that data and to create risks in different populations that are unique to those populations, unique to the cultures of those civilizations. So, thank you.
Thank you. Kevin, you work with a very specialized population and group.
I do. Thank you very much. My name is Kevin Critty, and I am the Chief Operations Officer for Tactical Rehabilitation. And I am blessed to have the opportunity to work and serve our nation's heroes, the United States military. We wake up every day at Tactical Rehabilitation with the concept and the thought and the culture of a heart to serve others. Our founder, David Marr, our CEO, originally said we serve those that serve. Our employees came to me last week, in fact, and said, you know, it's really about having a heart to serve others, and can we think of it that perspective? And we do. Our people get up every day. They love to come to work. They focus on the biomechanical needs that are the most common injuries, but also the most debilitating and inhibiting injuries that our military has to help protect our freedom. And an interesting place to talk about the kinds of freedoms when we're sitting here in Vegas, right? So we really focus on those biomechanical needs, which again prevent our soldiers, our airmen, our seamen from being able to go back to work, whether it's training issues, whether it's combat issues. And these are the most common injuries that they face. So getting them back to service and getting them back to duty, getting them to feel like, hey, I can still contribute. One of the things that I would really like us to see as we move forward is how, and all the technology that we use, and coming from 24 years with Cisco in the technology and health education and government integration sector, how do we also not lose sight of the patient's needs? Mm-hmm. So we've talked quite a bit about over the last yesterday and today, we've heard several panels and keynotes on, is it a business or is it focused on health? For me, I'd like us to be able to invert our budget. And all of you face the same thing, and that's why we've been talking about this quite a bit. We spend 80% of our budget on everything behind serving the patient. I'd like to spend 80% of our time and our effort and our money on the actual time we get to be with our patient. And that means a lot of process change, a lot of the things that have to happen in the insurance industry and the back, all about how we do our billing and services. For us, one of the key things that was set down for us is we will only provide the best quality of service for our patients because we need them to heal, not just slow the degradation of their debilitating process, right? And so with that, our focus is on the technology that we need to be able to do that quickly in terms of leveraging the technology to address our patients' need for custom solutions that will help them get there. But I see the technology going beyond that, right? So I want that to be a tool that's behind the scenes for our patients, that we can spend the quality time listening to them, understanding their needs, getting them back on the right track, whether it's mentally or physically, those biomechanical things that we work on for them. So we want them to be able to get out there, but I want to see more technology, and I foresee more technology to allow us to do that more quickly. So assess some of the proactive nature around what those would look like, how do we address that in those particular areas that we solve, and then be able to use that digitally in providing our solutions, whether that's through 3D printing or other mechanisms that we today transmit those to be able to provide our custom solutions.
Excellent. Hari, speaking of custom solutions and quicker access to medicine, let's talk about what you do.
Yeah. Hari Subramanian. I'm a serial entrepreneur working on lung diseases. Can you hear me okay? Okay. Focusing on lung health and lung diseases. And I work in a couple of companies. The first one is focusing on early screening for lung cancer. So we are working on a technology that is similar to a pap smear test, but for lung cancer, where you can do a buccal swab in a primary care physician's office, send it out, and then do a risk stratification for lung cancer. And the other company that I work for is on developing sensors for minimally invasive and robotic surgeries. So, and this is minimally invasive surgeries over the years have been really good, but still more than 50% of the surgeries are still done in an open manner. And that's something that we are hoping to change with these sensors that would make the surgeries safe and effective, and which in turn would improve the patient outcomes. So where I see things changing over the next 10 years, I'm certainly an eternal optimist. In case of diagnostics and screening, I foresee these multi-panel tests that's coming out where, let's say, using your saliva or using blood, where you would be able to screen for multiple different cancer types. It's possible those tests might not be perfect, but at least it would give you an early indication of where you are so that you can either A, change your lifestyle, or B, make sure that you are having these conversations with your primary care physicians. In terms of surgeries, the robotic surgeries are certainly going to be coming upstream. So it's not like a robot completely independently doing surgery on its own. I don't think so that's going to happen, but these robotic platforms are going to augment what these surgeons are actually doing. So for example, they would make these complex surgeries really safe and effective, and which in turn means that instead of patients staying in the hospital for 3, 4, 5 days, they can actually get discharged within a day or so, in turn reducing the actual cost of care associated with it.
Thank you. Gennaro, back to you. I would like to hear from each of you what inspired you to get to where you are today.
There's a few things. One that comes to mind, when I was very young, I had amblyopia. I had a lazy eye. And my father was able to catch the vision deficit early when I was about 3 years old. And I was able to save a majority of my vision. Not a lot of people have that opportunity and have that privilege to have someone that's a father, that's a physician, that could have caught that. And there's a lot of undeveloped countries as well where things such as amblyopia go underdiagnosed. That really headed me in the direction of trying to find a way to get technologies into those populations. I grew up also around a family of physicians, so I was always interested in medicine, and I loved to tinker, of course. So when I finally got to the point right at the beginning of COVID, I had a very solid background in clinical medicine, research, and biomedical engineering, and I came across a technology, which was the vital sign extraction from camera, that I saw that would be very useful in populations around the world, as well as the underserved in the US. And it motivated me to make some phone calls, track down people to develop it, and pull a company together in a very short time. And we had a wonderful turnout with it, and we're integrating it with different telemedicine platforms so you can get a more comprehensive visit when you're having your physician interaction. You can actually get your heart rate and blood pressure, respiratory rate, and oxygen, and to get some clinical data that can help make decisions.
Rahm, what do you think about that in terms of collecting that sort of immediate data and having that available? Where do you see that affecting your physician? Do you see that being impactful in your practice?
Oh, absolutely. The way we really see, our platform being deployed for a variety of health conditions is really being a hub for where multiple data sets would be collected and analyzed, and things like artificial intelligence used, machine learning used to really develop strategies focused on specific patients and populations of patients to get the best outcomes for the care. So if we can incorporate, information from sensors, or smart cities could be the thing of the future, where we're collecting this sort of data, incorporating all those social and environmental factors as well, and of course also clinical data from electronic health records and so forth. We really can get a good picture of the patient when they walk into the emergency room or into the operating room or into the primary care physician's office, about where we need to focus, what social factors are they faced with that are making their conditions worse, their diabetes worse, their hypertension worse, and so on. So I think it's very, very important that we collect all this sort of data.
Agreed. Healthcare and even the technology industry often requires a big investment in time, a lot of data, major steps for approvals. Hari, I'm sure you're experiencing this, putting together a cytopathology platform for testing. Oftentimes they say this industry is riddled with failures. What would you say to that?
Yeah, one end it is true, and that's a general statistic as well. And I think it seems like 5% of the small businesses are the only ones who survive. In case of healthcare, it's a lot less than that. And many factors are associated with that, right? One is certainly the regulatory aspect of it. And I know personally a few companies who had done really well in terms of the technology front, but unfortunately they were stumbled because some of the regulatory requirements were we need to recruit 10,000 patients for a study, or 20,000 patients for the study, because that's what the big guns have actually done that. And then the FDA wanted the same stuff to happen. I'm not here to criticize FDA. I think it's really critical what they're doing and how it is being done. But that's one of those things that's actually a stumbling block at this point in time. So what I see here is, thanks to COVID, thanks to how people are thinking about how this healthcare is changing, I think in the next several years or so, people are going to get creative in working around some of the stumbling blocks and then coming up with creative solutions where, be it either a clinical study where they would be able to recruit many patients, or talking to the physicians and getting them on board for the clinical studies. So I expect that to happen over the next several years or so.
Kevin, what would you say to that? You have a very interesting population where you almost need to have a faster response and a faster product turnout. So given your experience, how would you respond to that question?
So I agree with you, Hari, on that. I think part of the thing that we need to take into consideration is that the government funds a lot of studies, and I think there's a huge value in the studies. And so while there's a lot of bureaucracy in government, public funds do make available a lot of the testing and things that need to take place for us to find solutions. And no one would be able to fund that privately on their own. I mean, look at whether it's cancer, diabetes, or any other disease. We continue to make progress, but we need to make sure we have the grants that help us to get there and fund in that direction, because it wouldn't happen otherwise on its own. In our case, much of our work is to get our military personnel, men and women, back to service as quickly as we can. We do that with a lot of custom solutions and a lot of technology, and many of those technology pieces, while are private solutions, they're funded through technologies that came from government grants somewhere along the line, and then it's the integration of that. And that's what I think we're talking about, right? The fourth industrial revolution, where technology, we blur between technology and whether it's healthcare, education, you name it. How does that all come together to provide an integrated solution?
Can you talk about some of the custom solutions you offer? How do you integrate that? What is the technology you use to do that?
So a simple example would be in our orthotics equation, we partner with a company called Soul Supports. They're a fantastic provider. We not only weight calibrate for the individual, we also take into account the kind of packs and gear that they may carry. So in most cases, we'll provide them multiple sets of orthotics based on the kind of work they do. We'll also take into account whether they're in special forces or some other element that will factor into how that's laid out. But digitally, we will mold their feet. We transmit that to our provider, and then the Soul Support team can do one of a number of options. They can 3D print that. They can inversion mold that. They then will lay out the other pieces that will go along with that, fabricate it. In our case, while we have many individuals that reside on base and work on base, there are many that are about to deploy. And so we don't have weeks to come up with solutions, especially custom solutions. So there are times where we'll have to do a 24, 48-hour turnaround for either individuals or small troops that are about to deploy, because they come in, they need service right away, they're just done with training, they're going to deploy. And so if it wasn't for the technology and integration that the patients don't see, and we don't really care that they want to see that, we want to make sure that the technology is behind the solution and it's transparent, and we can talk to them about where their needs, what they're doing for as much as they can tell us, so we make sure we get the right product to them.
It's perfect. It's the marrying of human efficiency and the human element with the automation of expediting the response, which is great. Keeping that in mind, Rahm, what do you feel is one of the biggest innovations that's happened in the past 5 years?
I mean, I think just what we're discussing, really when we started, it was when high-tech Obamacare came about, and we heard his first inaugural speech and how technology could be used to change healthcare. And I think that has just improved over the last 10 years or so since that address. And the last 5 years, I think it's improved even more with the incorporation of things like AI and so forth, to really gain an understanding of the trends that lead up to critical events. We're seeing that even on the minutest scale, right? We're seeing technologies like in the intensive care unit, which look at vital signs right up to a cardiac arrest. So the nurses and doctors can pick that up, literally a few minutes before, and get the pads on and be prepared instead of reactive. So we're doing the same sort of thing in a population where we look at data and gather what are the trends leading up to an opioid overdose, or leading up to a maternal death, or some catastrophe, or spread of a pandemic. So I think just that growing improvement in the use of data and analytics is really what I see as the greatest improvement in the last 5 years.
Gennaro, I think that's kind of something you would agree with, considering you have technology that allows for that to happen remotely.
Yes. One of the things that we're looking at, and I think it's really the development, when I worked for Vital Intelligence, we got to the point where we were trying to actually practically implement the technology, and we realized how difficult it was to handle all of the data analysis, the integration with the physicians, the handling the RPM codes, et cetera. I moved over to Between MD so we could start to look at all of these technologies, gather all of the data in a central facility, well, not really a facility, a central computer, and be able to start to look at the data. We integrated virtual clinics. We also have integrated pharmacy. We've integrated patient-facing side as well as the physician-facing side, and we've also integrated a billing platform. And we're able to pull all the data together to get a look at the patient's vitals from beginning to end, and actually put that data in the patient's hands so that they can make better decisions about their health. It seems that that's one of the most important things. Between MD got its name because there's a majority of your health takes place in between your MD visits. And if the patients can actually take a responsibility and look and see that they can actually make a difference in their own health, it makes a huge difference.
Agreed. There's a quote that says the fourth industrial revolution has the potential to raise income levels and improve the quality of life for all people. However, the economic benefits are becoming more concentrated. It seems to be more concentrated amongst a small group, which is kind of the opposite of what we want to happen. This could cause bigger health disparities, which is a huge issue. It could cause bigger economic gaps. There's also the concern with automation. As a machine can do something that 5 people can do, there's the loss of jobs, which again leads back to that economic impact. As innovators, forward-looking, taking a look at that downstream effect, is there a way that we can think of how to fix this and address this? I will start with Kevin.
So I want to tackle one of the statements you made. So while automation in many cases displaces jobs, it also creates new jobs, right? So it may not be the same 5 people working on that line, but 3 to 5 of them are going to be either moved into maintenance of that or high-tech support. And so what I have found over the years where we justify technology or automation through the displacement of jobs, we tend to move those jobs into other areas and they never seem to go away. But what it does allow us to do is to do it quicker, more effectively, more productively. And that allows us to service our patients and get focused, from what we heard from one of the other presentations today, focused on the healthcare side and less on the business side. I've always believed that technology should be something that's behind the scene that works smoothly and does not interfere with our ability to provide a solution, whether that's healthcare or education or anything else. And I think in this case, we see more of that happening. On the disparity issue, I think no matter what comes out new, whether it's the next iPhone 12 or 13 or whatever is going to come out next or anything else, there's a small portion of the population that's going to grab a hold of that first or have access to it. In this case, we're talking about access to certain kinds of healthcare. To some extent, even though it's gone through the experimental stage to be able to be released, it really is the experimental stage for people to believe in that solution, technology or otherwise. Some of it's just the willingness of our patients to grab a hold of that and participate. And as they see others seeing positive results, they move to that rather quickly. So I think that's the experiment on the population, not in whether the medicine works or not, but for them to be able to rationalize and make that mental move themselves.
Hari, any further thoughts?
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And in fact, some of these newer innovations that's coming through, it has a higher probability of democratizing this healthcare, right? So for example, from the vantage point of the industry that I'm in, the mid device, we certainly see the cost of these imaging platforms and sensors coming down dramatically, which in turn increases the number of people who can potentially get diagnosed and screened and all of those things. So yesterday there was a very interesting talk from Dana from P23 where they were talking about how they can potentially have these testing done in these remote areas and all of those things. So I expect some of those things to happen. And same thing goes with surgeries, right? So some of these innovations that's going on, even though people are worried about these are robotic surgeries and all those things, the eventual idea of these things is to reduce the cost of care. And primarily because not just you need a specialized surgeon to do a very specialized procedure, but you can have these general surgeons work on some of the complex procedures and all of those things, thus reducing the actual cost of care itself. So while I do see some of the criticism with respect to the technology and other stuff, but on the flip side of it, the benefits are certainly going to outweigh the costs of it.
Agreed. And kind of like you mentioned, it'll be nice to kind of disperse the workload. It'll take, you know, instead of a heavy load being on the general practitioner or the specialist, it evens it out, so it provides more availability for patients. So I think that's a great perspective. So I think it'd be remiss if we didn't discuss the past year and a half and the effects of COVID, the pandemic on the industry as a whole. It's been rather unprecedented to say the least. I would like to ask, I'd like all of you to answer this actually, based on your areas of expertise. Do you think that with everything that's happened, innovation in terms of healthcare and technology has accelerated, stagnated, or even seen a regression? Gennaro.
I personally believe it's accelerated greatly. What I saw was there were a lot of different siloed technological developments, and when COVID hit, suddenly trying to implement these is what came to the forefront. There was a massive amount of multidisciplinary collaboration across fields. You had to look at experts in the remote patient management, you had to look at experts in billing, you had to look at experts in data analysis. You would have a variety of devices, and actually being able to integrate all of these on a computer science platform as well as in the cloud, suddenly you're looking at 5 or 6 or 7 different companies. What happened with Vital Intelligence is we moved in between MD, suddenly we partnered with that virtual clinic, which was 1 additional company, and people that could help us with the remote patient monitoring, that was 2, and the physicians, and then education. And suddenly you're looking at 7 different companies. To remain agile enough to make it through the pandemic and to move rapidly enough, we had to look at the disruptive companies that could move and switch directions at the drop of the hat. And I think even the large companies are seeing that, say the 3Ms of the world. The only way to move quickly enough is to partner with these little disruptive companies that can move at the speed of light and really bring this technology to life.
Rahm, what do you think? You're on the front lines.
Tough question. I mean, there's a potential to move forward. That's the way I'll answer. I mean, if we learn from the pandemic and the deficiencies in the healthcare system that were really brought to light, for example, the lack of just the sharing of information and data, which is really still, in my estimation, pretty siloed, because you really don't get what I envisioned, the complete picture when you see a patient, even surgically or in the emergency room. So that has to improve. So that interoperability component has to improve. But that's the nature of the way that it developed at first, technology. It became siloed and the data became siloed. So I think that'll be helpful. We have to, as we've been doing through the pandemic, which has allowed us to allocate things like resources, like PPE and ventilators, and we have to start to use data that doesn't have security concerns as much, like the social demographic and SDOH, as it's termed, and utilize that, because that has such a significant impact on the patient and the eventual outcomes with regard to any condition or illness. If we do those things, then I think we can move forward. I think that's kind of, we're right on that cusp of us discussing it, and hopefully over the next 5 years or so, I think we'll incorporate those things and really allow for healthcare to move forward and move into this new industrial revolution. Yeah, so.
Kevin?
So from our perspective, we looked at it in two ways, and we heard in the earlier presentation this morning that there's the business side and the healthcare side to healthcare as an over umbrella, right? And so when COVID hit us, we said, one, we're not going to lay anybody off due to COVID for any reason whatsoever. And so we said, while we have a reduction in patients that might walk through the door because bases closed up and all that sort of thing, we said we would focus on the efficiency of our operations during that window and every possible thing that we could do to revamp the business side of what we do to not only sustain ourselves, but then grow. Mm-hmm. And while we saw other competitors in the marketplace either close their doors or scale back, we said we wouldn't do that. We would be there for our military personnel. As a result, we have nearly doubled the business in the last year, maybe 16 months or so, and we're on a trajectory to continue to do that. But I think, while the business side is the tough side of the conversation, we always want to talk about healthcare and the time with the patient. If we don't run an efficient business on the backside of that, we won't be there for them. And so that was our opportunity to improve that side of it and work with our partners the same way. David and I have spent time going to our principal partners and meeting with them and setting up how do we create more of a partnership relationship, not only with them, but with other partners. And that has, really projected or trajected our business significantly. And I think if we don't lose sight of both sides of that part of the way healthcare has to operate as a whole, we're good. And if we do lose sight of one or the other, we're just not going to be there in the long run.
Excellent. Hari?
Yeah, our company, since we are preclinical trial companies, we had many of our studies that were going on with the clinics and all those things, and everything came to a screeching halt. And I still remember sometime February, March of last year, I was naively thinking that this is all going to be done in like 2 to 3 weeks or so. How 2 to 3 weeks? No idea, but that's exactly what I was thinking. And it did not, right? So, everyone adapted to it. In fact, we did as well. In fact, if I were to reflect back on things happened over the past year or so, we actually came out much better than what we would have otherwise. So, for example, many of the physicians with whom we were involved with and talking to, they all adapted to virtual conversation. I mean, that would have never happened. And then they were all more than happy. In fact, some of the usability studies that we were doing for FDA, that was all done in a virtual fashion, and that really yielded us a lot of benefits and all those things. So I think if we were to hold on to some of these advantages of doing these virtual stuff, taking telemedicine and all of those things, I think we might come out much more positively rather than as some of the stumbling issues that has faced us in the past year.
Thank you. We only have a few minutes left, and so I wanted to ask the audience if you had any questions for any of the panelists before we wrap up.
Good question. Yeah, so the way, I can just say from the way that we work, we actually work in close conjunction with academia, let's call it. We actually work with the University of Maryland, public health. And so we always base all our analytics and our analysis and our geospatial work around grounded academic research that's already developed potential paths, for us to study and move forward. And so I see that always as the background and the knowledge upon which we will build any sort of analytic platform in the future. If we do not do that and we just start doing it randomly, that's when we're just going to be going in circles and not really getting anywhere with regards to our capabilities in the future. I don't know if that is what you're specifically asking or if that addresses your question. In terms of a physician and our lack of kind of a feeling of, not really doing what we thought we would be doing when we went into being a medical physician, I think that is in part because of many of the issues that have been brought up from the panel, is just that there's much more bureaucracy and other things besides actual patient care that we do. Someone asked me that earlier today. I thought maybe we do about 80% non-patient care work and about 20% actually taking care of the patient. So it could be that some of the automation might help improve that balance, but as just the last thing I'll say, I mean, physicians and the provider community tend to be a little resistant to automation because they think it's going to be replacing. But it really isn't, as long as it isn't, and it has to be portrayed that way. If you portray it as replacing providers, they're going to fight it, and I've already seen that happen multiple times with technologies. But if it's portrayed as assisting you in your diagnostics or in your life, then there'll be much more, uptake of that sort of technology. I hope that answers the question, but that's my answer.
I can briefly expand on that one. I do wear another hat, which is I'm a research faculty at Northwestern University. So one thing that we always say is, from the academic side of it, academia makes impossible possible, while the industry makes the possibility a reality, right? So, and I foresee, as we go about doing things, this interaction between the academia and the industry is actually going to go more and more. And in fact, the grants and the federal government and even the FDA is encouraging many of those things to happen. So,
Go ahead. Sorry, so to cover, can you repeat that? You're a bit hard to hear.
You say that you're falling in the same trap that we fall in other industrial revolutions, where we're working in silos and we're not talking about cross-vertical collaboration, about communication protocols, and all those things that will accelerate Industry 4.0.
Right, so you're saying there's people working in silos and now there's collaboration coming forward. You want us to elaborate more on that? Okay. Correct. So I think you guys have kind of talked about that, and let's elaborate that on a little bit more. Gennaro, you were speaking about this. Prior to COVID, this kind of came up in the COVID aspect, is different areas of the industry were kind of working in silos. And now, there's always been the need for collaboration, but the past year and a half has really accelerated that to where multiple areas are coming together. Case in point, the 3Ms and the IBMs and, even smaller companies making ventilators like we were talking about the other day, Rahm. Let's elaborate more on that. The future of that, is that a trend that's going to continue? Where do we see that going?
I personally think it's going to be a trend that continues. There's a group called Startup Health that has somewhere between 75 and 100 different companies that are all innovative, but they're all very siloed, different technologies. And I remember looking at it a couple years back saying, boy, if these guys talked together or spoke together and actually worked together, they could come up with some incredible companies. And there's one that jumps to mind, and it's called Baby Scripts, and they use scales, and they use continuous glucose monitors and blood pressure monitors to be able to monitor specifically pregnancy. Those same 3 devices can easily translate into high blood pressure issues, diabetes, chronic kidney disease, cardiac metabolic syndrome, but they silo themselves. And being able to look at some of these companies and being able to collaborate with them, they have brilliant ideas, but being able to build on their ideas and hit a wider audience, a wider group of conditions really, is something that's going to continue into the future, I think. I don't think you can be competitive without working with other groups across borders and locally or within the industry.
Absolutely. I think that's a huge thing, is especially in terms of communication, is opening the doors of communication, sharing information to collaborate together. So I think that brings us to time. Thank you to the 4 of you for joining us today. Thank you for sharing your insights. To everyone here, thank you so much for everything you do, and thank you for joining us. We hope you found this informative, and enjoy the rest of your conference.